He's back for his weekly visits throughout the National Hockey League season, and with camps opening on Wednesday, we couldn't pick a better time to welcome our friend Pierre LeBrun. First of all, Pierre, you look tanned, you look rested. How was your summer?
It was amazing, Jay, and I hope yours was as well. Of course, it feels like a long time ago. I was back for the GM meetings on September 2nd in Detroit, and last week for the NHL Player Tour in Las Vegas. So have hit the ground running here with a busy September, but always have time for you, Jay.
Really appreciate it. You were at the Leafs opening media availability as they open camp on Wednesday. Their first camp opening without Mitchell Marner in a long, long time. What's the vibe around the team without Mitchell around the dressing room?
It just hit me while we were listening to the news conferences. You know what we didn't see on this day with the Leafs opening camp? We didn't see people running around with their hair on fire. I mean, the opening of camp every year for the last several years for the Leafs, there's been just something hovering over this franchise as part of the whole Shanaplan thing. You know, the playoff, lack of playoff success, questions about that. A few years ago, Kyle Dubas entering the final year of his deal. That was a big topic. Then Sheldon Keefe, lame duck coach. You could feel that over the team. And obviously last year, Mitch Marner's contract situation was a gigantic, burden on the franchise, whether they want to admit it or not, in terms of the white noise. There was none of that on Wednesday. Sink or swim, as I've said. This is Brad Treliving and Craig Berube's team more than ever with far fewer distractions. It doesn't mean they're going to punch through come postseason, but certainly it means starting camp here with a lot less white noise around.
And you alluded to it, the Marner extension question hovered over Toronto all of last season. Now in Edmonton, Oiler fans are posing those same questions about the fact that Connor McDavid hasn't signed an extension yet. You posed an interesting hypothetical question to Leafs general manager Brad Treliving on Wednesday. How did he respond to that?
Well, I didn't mention McDavid by name, let me be clear, but I talked about the fact that the Leafs, for the first time in ages, have some cap flexibility moving forward here. A lot of that because Marner left, of course. And it just so happens, as I asked Brad Treliving at the news conference, that there are some big names around the league that have not extended yet, entering the final year of their deals. Of course, I was referring to McDavid, who a lot of Leaf fans would dream of having in a Leafs uniform next year. I don't think it's a very likely scenario, but what I wanted to hear from Brad Treliving is whether he's going to keep some of those cap dollars for next summer, whether it's McDavid or another big name, because the Leafs do have that flexibility. But he quickly deflected off that question. He didn't want to delve into that, and I don't blame him. I will say that when I sat down with Brad Treliving a couple weeks ago in Detroit for a piece in The Athletic, he talked about the balance that certainly they had of wanting to be aggressive before the trade deadline here in season. Jay, they still want to add a top six forward if they can in season. But also, yes, there are obviously potentially some opportunities next summer as the salary cap goes up again, right?
Yep.
So the Leafs probably trying to balance both those scenarios.
Another big topic of discussion over the summer and the last couple of weeks certainly has been the future of Sidney Crosby in Pittsburgh. And I love that the Pens continue to deliver their season tickets door to door right to their season ticket holders. And Sidney always participates in that. The downside from Sid's perspective is that reporters are able to swarm him and say, hey, Sid, do you really want to stay or do you want to move on? And he seemed to really have shut it all down this week. He said he really wants to stay. He can't control the rumors. Having said that, he's in the beginning of a 2-year extension. The team is in the early stages, the Penguins that is, of what appears to be a long rebuild. Could you see Sid's stance softening, Pierre, as the year goes on and the Penguins potentially don't win many hockey games?
Yeah, and that's the great question. And listen, I feel partly responsible for Sidney Crosby having to deal with those questions this week because of the piece I wrote last week in Vegas, where I thought Sidney Crosby was terrific, and the way he answered the questions we had in our interview room with other fellow journalists as well about his future. I asked him about, the way the Bell Center crowd at Four Nations adored him, and didn't have to push too hard to read between the lines what I was really asking. And Crosby gave some great answers, as you saw in my piece. But I also made a point of saying last week, and I think this got lost in the reaction to that piece, that he's still very much, his heart and his mind is in Pittsburgh. And the question is, can he ever see himself being able to let go of that? Right now, I don't think he has. But I think what gave juice to the story is what his agent Pat Brisson told me, right? Where Pat Brisson talked about the fact that he wants to see Sidney Crosby playing playoff hockey before the end of his career. And so that really, I think, gave the story another layer. And honestly, it probably ripped the Band-Aid off a conversation that a lot of different people around the hockey world have been having for a year. Is Sidney Crosby going to stay in Pittsburgh or not if the team doesn't start winning again? I don't think we can answer that question because Sidney Crosby hasn't truly answered it for himself. But what I will tell you is that if this is another terrible season for the Penguins, that this will continue to be a topic of conversation, not just for all of us, Jay, heading into the March 6th trade deadline, but I think internally within that Crosby camp and obviously with the Pittsburgh Penguins. So TBD.
Also TBD, the Kirill Kaprizov situation, which has been very exciting for people like yourself. I know this is unusual, a player turning down the opportunity to be the highest paid player in the history of the National Hockey League at $16 million on the AAV, but that's exactly what Kirill did last week. Now, you also reported on yesterday's edition of Insider Trading that deal is still on the table. So obviously the Wild are still very much interested in signing Kaprizov. But I am truly fascinated by this one, Pierre, because Kirill Kaprizov seems like the kind of guy who really might actually push this all the way to July 1 next year. What's the latest in terms of the Wild superstar right now?
Yeah, that's right. Well, I think number one, we're finally going to hear from him. He's going to speak to media in Minnesota on Thursday as camp opens, and those will be his first public comments since he turned down this deal. And listen, he will have been coached by his agent Paul Theofanis into what he should be saying, so maybe we won't get much out of that. But I'm hoping that's not the case. I can tell you that the Wild absolutely still feel that Kaprizov wants to stay and wants to sign, which begs the question, then what's it going to take? I mean, I don't know that a lot of teams around the league were ready to give him $16 million a year over 8 years. And it's not a knock at Minnesota. It's just that they love this player so much, and they've never had a player of his ilk, really, that they've developed and drafted in their history. So it's okay for them to have the overpay because they want to keep him. But, what does it take then? If he wants to stay but didn't sign that offer, where is this headed? So I think that's what, when I talk to other teams around the league, they're asking the same question, Jay. But I think it's important to note that the Wild believe that this is not a firm no, that there's still wiggle room to find a way here. But it really comes down to, what the player's agent is up to here in terms of his counter. The bottom line is I think the agent, Paul Theofanis, knows he has a ton of leverage, that the Wild desperately want to keep this guy. I mean, the owner was quoted a couple of weeks ago saying we're going to pay him $60 million a year and we're going to get this done. It was in a lot of ways, a strange way to enter negotiation because you just showed your hand to the agent. So I can't tell you where this is headed because it's a very delicate one.
Finally, I have to address the elephant in the room, which is the fact that your guy, Micah Parsons, has been traded away from your beloved Dallas Cowboys and now is thriving with the Packers. However, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Okay, the Cowboys haven't looked too bad under Brian Schottenheimer. Overall, Pierre LeBrun, biggest Cowboys fan I know. How are you feeling about your team 2 weeks into the season?
Yeah, I mean, they could be 2-0 because I thought they played well in Philadelphia opening night. Of course, they could be 0-2. I was in Dallas to witness that gong show of a game with the Giants last Sunday.
What a game.
I was at the game, and that was really insane. And thank goodness for the best kicker in football.
Yep.
But no, listen, I've not hidden my feelings on this. It's just gut-wrenching to see a talent like Micah Parsons trade away. But I will say, let's judge this trade in full after you see what happens with the 2 picks. The Cowboys draft well under Will McClay, as you know, Jay. Let's see what happens. At the end of the day, I think the owner fumbled the ball on this. Micah Parsons should have been a Cowboy for life. But I don't think it's a one-sided trade either. So TBD as well.
There you go, TBD. And we'll look forward to chatting with you every week throughout the season and following the Cowboys run, because the Cowboys are always fun to follow, whether you're a fan like Pierre is or not a fan, like many of you aren't. Pierre, this has been a treat. Great chatting with you, buddy. We'll talk to you next week. Don't forget, we also have a wonderful slate of preseason hockey on the network coming up Tuesday. Flyers and Habs, Rick Tocchet, Flyers legend, now their head coach. 2 different regions, Leafs and Sens, can see the Sens and Maple Leafs on TSN 4 and 5. And then it's Connor McDavid and the Oilers against Kyle Connor and the Jets. Both of them need new contracts.